Dr. Ben Carter knelt in the rich soil of New Eden's main agricultural sector, his hands deep in the earth as he carefully planted what appeared to be ordinary corn seeds. The morning sun cast long shadows across the fields, where hundreds of colonists worked alongside him. To any observer, it looked like a normal farming community preparing for harvest season. Maria Santos wiped sweat from her forehead as she guided a mechanical planter through the next row. She had been a farmer on Earth before volunteering for colony duty, but the plants she now tended were unlike anything that had ever grown in terrestrial soil. Each seed contained genetic modifications that had taken Earth's best scientists decades to perfect. "Ben, we got the signal 10 minutes ago," Maria called out, not breaking her rhythm with the planter. "Gardens are go." Ben nodded and stood up, brushing dirt from his knees. Around him, 300 colonists continued their work with the same steady pace they had maintained for months. No panic, no rushing. Just the methodical planting of crops that would feed the colony through the coming winter. Or so it would appear to anyone watching from orbit. High above New Eden, a Vextar surveillance ship monitored the human colony through powerful sensors. Commander Hive Scout Technol clicked his mandibles in confusion as he studied the readings. According to Coalition intelligence, humans should be evacuating their colonies or preparing defensive positions. Instead, they were farming. "Scan deeper," Technol ordered his sensor operator. "These readings make no sense. Show me weapons. Show me military preparations." The operator, a younger Vextar named Buzzedrone Kef, manipulated the controls with practiced precision. "Sir, I detect standard agricultural equipment, civilian transports, and what appears to be a school where human children are attending classes. No weapon signatures above small arms for hunting." Technol studied the displays, his compound eyes reflecting the green and blue images of the peaceful colony below. The Coalition analysis must be wrong. These humans are not preparing for war. They are simply farmers. On the planet's surface, those same farmers continued their work with purpose that went far beyond growing food. Ben Carter checked his watch and nodded to Maria. She activated a small device on her belt, sending a coded signal to every human on New Eden. Within seconds, every colonist knew that Protocol Garden was now active. The children in the school that the aliens had observed were indeed learning, but their lessons were not in traditional subjects. 8-year-old Jimmy Walsh raised his hand as his teacher, Mrs. Ellen Price, showed the class different types of seeds under a microscope. "Mrs. Price, this one looks different from the others," Jimmy said, pointing to a seed that appeared to shimmer with an odd blue-green color. "Very good, Jimmy. That's a Type 7 seed. Can you tell me what makes it special?" The boy squinted through the microscope again. "It has those tiny spikes all around it, and it glows a little bit." "Correct. And what did we learn those spikes are for?" "They inject stuff into the air when the plant grows up," Jimmy answered. "But I forgot what kind of stuff." Mrs. Price smiled. "That's all right. You'll remember when you're older. For now, just know that every plant we grow here helps protect our home." 3 star systems away, Admiral Rick Stone stood on the bridge of the UES Hartford, watching as Coalition ships moved into position around human colonies. His ship appeared to be a standard cargo vessel, complete with agricultural supplies and mining equipment visible in its cargo bays. The alien ships ignored it completely. "Admiral, we're receiving activation codes from Central Command," his communications officer reported. "Acknowledged. Signal all ships in the fleet. Begin Phase 2 of Protocol Garden." Across human space, vessels that had been dismissed as civilian transports began subtle changes. Cargo containers shifted to reveal hidden weapon systems. Agricultural equipment reconfigured itself into military hardware. Mining ships extended arrays that looked like excavation tools but served very different purposes. On Earth, Director Lisa Stone watched the deployment with satisfaction. Her brother Rick had spent 15 years building what appeared to be the galaxy's most boring merchant fleet. Slow, clumsy ships that carried nothing but farmers, supplies, and plant seeds to distant worlds. The Coalition had scanned them countless times and found exactly what they expected to find. "Director, we're getting reports from our intelligence networks," her aide informed her. "The aliens are confused. They can't understand why we're not running scared. Lisa smiled. Of course they're confused. They're looking for the wrong things. They expect us to fight like they do with big ships and energy weapons. They have no idea that we've been preparing for war by learning how to grow things. Back on New Eden, the school day ended and the children walked home through fields that were rapidly changing. Plants that had been small seedlings that morning were now knee-high and growing visibly. The alien sensors detected the increased biological activity but interpreted it as normal agricultural growth accelerated by human farming techniques. Dr. Ben Carter gathered his research team in what appeared to be a simple greenhouse. Inside, plants grew in conditions that would have been impossible on Earth. Some thrived in pure methane atmospheres. Others grew in temperatures that would melt steel. A few seemed to feed on radiation that would kill most life forms. Team, we've been working toward this moment for 5 years, Ben said, looking at each of his researchers. Susan, how are your atmospheric processors coming along? Dr. Susan Clark, a biochemist who had joined the colony 2 years earlier, checked her tablet. The fungal networks are established on all 17 target worlds. Once we activate them, they'll begin converting local atmospheres to compositions that will be problematic for coalition species. And the defensive varieties, Ben asked. Ready for deployment. The coalition ships are in for quite a surprise when they try to land troops. Maria Santos entered the greenhouse still wearing her farming clothes. Ben, the regular colonists are asking questions. They know something's happening, but they don't know what. That's by design, Ben replied. The fewer people who know the details, the better. They'll understand soon enough. High above, Commander Technol received new orders from the Coalition fleet. The bombardment of human colonies would begin in 12 hours. He felt almost sorry for the farmers below who continued their peaceful work, unaware that death was coming from the stars. Prepare the bombardment systems, he ordered. Target the agricultural centers first. Perhaps destroying their food supplies will force them to surrender quickly. As the Vextar ship powered up its weapons, something strange began happening. In the fields below, plants that had been growing slowly all day suddenly burst into rapid growth. Vines spread across the ground like green lightning. Trees that had been saplings reached toward the sky. Flowers bloomed in patterns that formed geometric shapes visible from orbit. Technol stared at his screens in growing alarm. What is happening? Down there? Before anyone could answer, every plant on New Eden released spores into the atmosphere simultaneously. The cloud of microscopic particles rose into the sky like a green fog, spreading outward from the colony in all directions. The first of those spores reached the Vextar ship 15 minutes later. 6 months after the failed negotiations at Harmony Gate, the same conference room hosted a very different meeting. Chancellor Zekthul sat hunched in his chair, his once proud mandibles now trembling with fear. Speaker Velnas had lost much of her crystalline brightness, her form dimmed by stress and defeat. Around the table sat the broken leadership of what had once been the most powerful alliance in known space. Admiral Rick Stone entered the room wearing the clean uniform of the United Earth Navy, no longer hiding behind the disguise of a merchant captain. Behind him walked Colonel Jake Martinez, who had traded his diplomatic advisor role for his true position as Earth's military liaison. The transformation was complete. Humanity no longer pretended to be harmless farmers and peaceful colonists. Ambassador Katie Phillips took her seat across from the coalition leadership, but this time she was not asking for anything. The tablet in front of her contained terms, not requests. The balance of power had shifted completely in humanity's favor. Chancellor Zekthul, Speaker Velnas, Katie began, her voice calm and confident. Thank you for requesting this meeting. I trust your journey here was educational. The journey had indeed been educational for the coalition delegates. Their ships had passed through what had once been the Vega Defense Network, now a garden, of floating vines that stretched across an entire star system. They had seen former coalition worlds where human plants had taken root, creating atmospheres that welcomed human colonists while remaining toxic to most other species. Zekthul's voice was barely a whisper. Ambassador Phillips, the coalition formally requests immediate ceasefire and the beginning of peace negotiations. Katie smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. A ceasefire implies that both sides have been fighting. You attacked us. We defended ourselves. The fighting stops when we decide it stops. Dr. Ben Carter sat at Katie's right side, no longer disguised as a simple colonist scientist. His true role as Director of Biological Warfare Development was now clear to everyone in the room. In front of him lay samples of humanity's latest biological innovations, contained in sealed containers that made the alien delegates nervous just by their presence. Before we discuss terms, Ben said, opening one of the containers to reveal what looked like ordinary flower seeds, I want you to understand what you're dealing with. These seeds can lie dormant in space for centuries. When they encounter the right conditions, they grow into plants that can survive in any environment your species call home. They eat metal, consume energy, and reproduce faster than your weapons can destroy them. He closed the container and opened another, revealing spores so small they looked like glittering dust. These are designed specifically for coalition member species. Each type targets a different biology. They're completely harmless to humans but deadly to everyone else in this room. We've scattered billions of them throughout the galaxy over the past 6 months. Speaker Velnus chimed with distress. You would commit genocide against entire species? Katie leaned forward. We would defend ourselves against species that threaten to cage us like animals. The spores are controllable. They can be activated or deactivated by human command. Think of them as a sword hanging over your heads, waiting for us to decide whether to let it fall. Admiral Rick Stone activated a holographic display that showed the current military situation across the galaxy. Green markers indicated human-controlled systems, which now outnumbered coalition holdings by 3-1. Red markers showed coalition fleets, most of which were trapped in defensive positions around their core worlds. Your blockade failed, Rick announced. Your ground invasions were defeated. Your supply lines have been cut by plants that eat starships. You have perhaps 2 months of resources remaining before your fleet starts starving. The truth was even worse than Rick stated. Coalition ships could no longer operate in most of the galaxy without encountering human biological weapons. Space, lanes that had been safe for thousands of years, were now gardens of hostile plant life that attacked any non-human vessel. The Coalition had become prisoners in their own territory. Director Lisa Stone's voice came through the conference room. Speakers, broadcast from her command center on Earth. The terms are simple, she announced. Complete human autonomy in all matters. Recognition of human sovereignty over any world where we choose to establish colonies. Removal of all coalition military forces from human space. And tribute. Tribute? Zekthul asked, his mandibles clicking with confusion. Food, Lisa replied. Your species will provide agricultural products to feed human expansion. In return, we'll provide you with plants that can grow in environments hostile to coalition biology. You'll help us spread across the galaxy, and we'll help you survive in a galaxy that's becoming increasingly hostile to non-human life. The terms were harsh but not impossible. The coalition would become junior partners in their own galaxy, dependent on human biological technology for survival. But the alternative was extinction, as human spores made more and more worlds uninhabitable for coalition species. Katie stood up and placed a new tablet on the table. You have 1 hour to sign these agreements. If you refuse, we'll activate the dormant spores we've placed throughout coalition space. Every world you consider home will become a garden where only humans can live. Colonel Jake Martinez smiled as he watched the alien delegates read through the terms. He remembered the day 6 months ago when these same beings had tried to threaten humanity with cages and ultimatums. Now they were begging for mercy from the species they had underestimated. You thought our love of growing things made us weak, Katie said as the coalition leadership huddled together, whispering in their various languages about surrender and survival. You didn't understand that we were growing weapons you couldn't. Imagine soldiers you couldn't defeat and a civilization you couldn't stop. Dr. Ben Carter opened one final container, revealing seeds that glowed with their own internal light. These are the future, he explained. They can terraform dead worlds into gardens suitable for human life in less than a year. They can also reverse that process if we're threatened again. Every world in the galaxy is now potentially ours. Chancellor Zekthul looked at the glowing seeds and made his decision. With shaking claws, he signed the surrender documents that would end coalition, dominance of the galaxy forever. Speaker Velnas followed, her crystalline hand leaving light traces as she agreed to terms that would make her people dependent on human goodwill for survival. Katie Phillips smiled as she collected the signed agreements. Excellent. Welcome to humanity's galaxy. You'll find we're very reasonable rulers as long as you remember that we're the ones who decide what grows and what dies. As the defeated coalition delegates left the station, Rick Stone looked out at the stars through the conference room windows. Human ships moved through space like seeds on the wind, carrying plants and colonists to worlds that would soon bloom with earthborn life. The galaxy had tried to cage humanity, and instead had learned to fear the species that could turn any world into a weapon. The negotiations had collapsed 6 months ago, but from their ashes, humanity's garden bloomed eternal, across the stars. And in that garden, only humans decided what lived and what died. The metal walls of Harmony Gate Station hummed with the low vibration of life support systems. Ambassador Katie Phillips sat across from beings that looked like nightmares made real. The Vextar Chancellor Zekthul resembled a giant insect with razor-sharp mandibles that clicked when he spoke. His compound eyes reflected the cold lights of the conference room in 1,000 tiny fragments. Speaker Velnas of the Mordoon race looked like living crystal, her body made of what appeared to be blue-white glass that pulsed with inner light. When she moved, she made sounds like wind chimes in a storm. Both aliens stared at Katie with expressions that might have been contempt or curiosity. With non-human faces, it was impossible to tell. Colonel Jake Martinez stood behind Katie's chair, his hand resting near his sidearm. He had fought in 3 wars before joining the diplomatic corps, and his instincts told him this meeting would end badly. The aliens had requested this neutral ground to discuss what they called the human problem, but Jake suspected they had already made their decision. Katie looked down at the tablet in front of her. The terms were simple and brutal. Humanity would accept complete isolation within their home solar system. No more colonies, no more expansion, no more contact with other species except through coalition oversight. In exchange, Earth would be allowed to continue existing. These terms are completely unacceptable, Katie said, her voice steady despite the fear growing in her chest. Humanity has established 37 colony worlds through legal means. We have harmed no one. Our expansion has been peaceful. Chancellor, Zekthul's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sound that made Jake's skin crawl. Peaceful, you say? Yet wherever humans go, change follows. Your species adapts too quickly. You learn too fast. You make other species uncomfortable. Uncomfortable? Katie leaned forward. Since when is being good at survival a crime? Speaker Velnas chimed in, her crystal voice sharp as breaking glass. Your reproductive rate exceeds galactic norms by 300%. Your technological advancement in the past century surpasses what most species achieve in a millennium. You terraform worlds in decades, while others require centuries. This is not natural. Katie felt a cold anger building inside her. So you want to cage us because we're successful? We want to contain a potential threat before it becomes an actual one. Zekthul said, the Galactic Coalition has maintained peace for over 2,000 years. We will not allow one species to upset that balance. In orbit around the station, Captain Alex Morrison watched the proceedings through a secure channel aboard the UES Liberty. His ship was supposedly a diplomatic escort, but Alex knew the real reason he was here. If talks failed, he had orders that would change everything. His crew of 200 waited at battle stations, though they appeared to be conducting routine maintenance. Back on Earth, Director Lisa Stone monitored the situation from Central Command buried 3 miles beneath the Colorado Rockies. Banks of screens showed the positions of coalition fleets throughout human space. 47 alien warships surrounded the 17 most important human colonies. The message was clear: surrender or watch your people die. Director, her aide whispered, We're receiving coded transmissions from all colony worlds. They report. Ready status. Lisa nodded without taking her eyes off the main screen. For 50 years, humanity had prepared for this moment. Every colony established, every farm planted, every child educated. All of it had led to this conversation on a metal station orbiting a dead star. Katie stood up, placing her palms flat on the conference table. Chancellor Zekthul, Speaker Vilnas, I want you to understand something very clearly. Humanity rejects your ultimatum completely. We will not be caged. We will not be contained. And we will not bow to threats. Zekthul's compound eyes seemed to glitter with satisfaction. Then you have chosen war. The coalition fleets will begin bombardment of your illegal colonies within 24 hours. Perhaps when you see your settlers burning, you will reconsider. You think we're afraid of you? Katie asked, a strange smile playing at the corners of her mouth. You think we've spent the last half-century planting flowers and teaching children because we're peaceful? Speaker Velnas tilted her crystal head. What else would you be doing? Katie laughed, a sound that made both aliens step backward. You have no idea what you're dealing with. You see farmers and think we're weak. You see gardens and think we're harmless. You see children playing and think we're innocent. She leaned across the table, her eyes hard as steel. Let me tell you what you missed while you were so busy counting our ships and measuring our guns. You never asked what we were growing in those gardens. You never wondered why human children study botany alongside mathematics. You never questioned why every human colony requests agricultural supplies first and weapons last. Colonel Jake Martinez smiled for the first time since entering the room. He had trained some of those children himself. The aliens would learn soon enough. Katie picked up her tablet and transmitted humanity's formal response to the coalition ultimatum. Chancellor, Speaker, you came here today to put humanity in a cage, but you've made a fundamental error. You assumed we were rabbits when we're actually wolves. Negotiations have collapsed. In 6 hours, you'll discover what happens when you threaten a species that has spent 50 years turning every world they touch into a weapon. The transmission went out across the galaxy on all frequencies. Every human colony received the same message. 3 words that would change the balance of power forever. Gardens are go. Zekthul's mandibles clicked in confusion. What does that mean? Katie was already walking toward the door. It means you're about to learn why the galaxy should fear humanity's foliage. Admiral Hive Lord Sekrim stared at the tactical display aboard his flagship with disbelief. In the past 72 hours, the Coalition had lost contact with 43 ground units, 17 surveillance ships, and 2 entire battle groups. The humans were not running. They were not hiding. They were winning. Sir, we have another report from the Kepler Supply Depot, his communications officer announced, his voice shaking. The entire facility has been consumed. Sekrim turned, his compound eyes toward the officer. Consumed by what? Vines, sir. Commander Tony Garcia's ship released some kind of seeds into the station's docking bays. Within 6 hours, plant matter had grown through every corridor, every storage compartment, every ship that was docked there. The vines ate the metal and turned it into more plant material. The Admiral's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation among his species. That's impossible. Plants cannot survive in vacuum. They cannot eat metal. But the evidence was undeniable. Images from the Kepler depot showed massive flowering vines wrapped around coalition battleships like party ribbons. Where the plants touched metal, the hull plating had been converted into some kind of organic compound that fed the continued growth. The entire supply depot had become a garden floating in space. Captain Roy Martinez piloted his ship, the UES Harvest, through the debris field that had once been a Vextar patrol fleet. His vessel looked like a standard agricultural transport, complete with hydroponic bays visible through transparent sections of the hull. But those same bays had produced the seeds that were now drifting through space, taking root on any surface. They encountered. Control, this is Harvest, Roy reported over his radio. Target area is clear, proceeding to next waypoint. His ship could operate indefinitely in deep space thanks to the closed-loop ecosystem contained within its agricultural sections. While coalition ships needed regular resupply, human vessels could grow their own food, produce their own oxygen, and even manufacture fuel from biological processes. The attempted blockade of human space had become impossible to maintain. On the industrial world of New Pittsburgh, factory supervisor Helen White walked through production lines that had undergone rapid conversion. Machines that had manufactured farming equipment 6 hours ago were now producing biological warfare dispensers. Assembly lines that had built irrigation systems were crafting devices designed to spread spores across entire star systems. "Helen, we've got new orders from Earth Command," her assistant called out over the noise of the machinery. "They want us to triple production of the Type 9 spore carriers." Helen nodded, checking her production schedules on a tablet computer. "Tell the night shift supervisors to switch lines 4 through 8 to Type 9 production, and activate the emergency growth chambers. We'll need more biomass to meet these quotas." The emergency growth chambers had been disguised as food storage facilities for 3 years. Now they revealed their true purpose, containing vast tanks where genetically modified organisms reproduced at incredible speeds. What had taken months to grow in laboratory conditions could now be produced in hours using industrial biological processes. Dr. Nancy Johnson stood in her field laboratory on the frontier world of Greenwood, observing her latest creation through a microscope. The plant spores she had developed 3 days ago were already obsolete, replaced by newer versions that had adapted to coalition countermeasures in real time. "The beautiful thing about biological warfare," she explained to her research team, "is that evolution never stops. Every time they develop a defense, we can create something new that bypasses it completely." Her latest spores were designed to feed on the crystalline structures that made up Mordoon physiology. When released into an atmosphere containing Mordoon life forms, the spores would multiply exponentially, converting the aliens' bodies into nutrients for further plant growth. The process was completely harmless to humans and other carbon-based life. Chancellor Zechthul convened an emergency session of the Coalition Council on the neutral world of Haven Prime. Representatives from 17 species gathered in the Great Assembly Hall, their various forms of anxiety and fear filling the chamber with a mixture of clicks, chimes, and electronic pulses. "The situation has exceeded all projections," Zechthul announced to the assembled delegates. "Human biological weapons are evolving faster than our scientists can analyze them. We have no effective countermeasures." Speaker Velnas, her crystalline form dimmed with stress, chimed her response. "My people are afraid to leave their home system. The spores that destroyed our patrol ships in the Vega sector specifically targeted our mineral-based biology. They turned our own soldiers into fertilizer for human plants." The Cylon delegate, a being of pure energy contained within a mechanical housing, spoke through electronic speakers. "Our psychic abilities provide no defense against biological attacks. We cannot read the minds of plants or influence their behavior through mental contact. For the first time in our history, we face an enemy we cannot understand." Back on Earth, Director Lisa Stone received reports from human colonies across the galaxy. Every world was now a fortress. Every farming community had revealed weapons that the Coalition had never imagined possible. Children who had been studying botany were now helping to cultivate biological weapons. Teachers who had been giving lessons about plant growth were coordinating military operations. "Director, we're receiving surrender requests from 3 Coalition member species," her aide reported. "The Zephyrians, the Altarians, and the Centauri Collective all want to negotiate separate peace treaties." Lisa studied the star charts showing human expansion over the past week. Green markers indicated worlds where human biological weapons had taken root. The color was spreading across the galaxy like an infection, marking the growth of humanity's living arsenal. No separate treaties, she decided. The Coalition threatened us as a unified force. They'll surrender as a unified force or face the consequences. Admiral Rick Stone's fleet had grown from 50 disguised cargo ships to over 300 vessels, as human colonies contributed their hidden military assets to the war effort. Manufacturing ships that had been producing agricultural equipment now built weapons. Transport ships that had carried colonists now deployed biological warfare specialists to new target systems. "Admiral, long-range sensors are detecting Coalition fleet movements," his tactical officer reported. It looks like they're pulling back from all human systems and consolidating their forces around their core worlds. Rick nodded grimly. They're trying to establish a defensive perimeter. Send word to all human colonies. Begin Phase 4 of Protocol Garden. It's time to show the galaxy what happens when you threaten a species that has learned to weaponize life itself. Across human space, the final phase began. Spores that had been dormant in space for decades activated simultaneously. Plants that had seemed dead on airless worlds suddenly burst into growth, fed by nutrients they had been storing in root systems that extended miles beneath planetary surfaces. The galaxy itself was becoming humanity's garden, and in this garden only humans could survive. The Coalition's attempt to cage humanity had failed. Now they would learn what it meant to face a species that had turned every world they touched into a weapon pointed at the heart of galactic civilization. Commander Technol watched in horror as his ship's systems began failing one by one. The green spores that had seemed harmless minutes earlier were now coating every surface of his vessel. Where they landed, metal corroded and electronics sparked and died. "Sir, we're losing life support on decks 3 through 7, his engineer reported, panic creeping into his voice. "The spores are eating through our hull plating." Technol tried to activate his communications array to warn the Coalition fleet, but the console was dead. Green fungus grew across the control panels, spreading like a living carpet that consumed everything it touched. "Emergency beacon," he ordered. "Manual activation." But it was too late. The Vextar surveillance ship tumbled through space, its crew gasping for air as their atmosphere leaked through holes that grew larger by the minute. Within an hour, the vessel was nothing more than a metal skeleton covered in flowering vines that bloomed in the vacuum of space. On the surface of New Eden, Dr. Ben Carter monitored the ship's destruction through his portable scanner. Phase 1 complete, he reported to his team. The spores performed exactly as designed. Technol's ship is neutralized. Maria Santos looked up from her own equipment, where she was tracking similar events across human space. "Ben, we're getting reports from all colonies. The surveillance ships are down. The Coalition has lost their eyes and ears." Sergeant Paul Davis stepped out from behind what had appeared to be a grain silo. For 6 months he had played the role of a simple farmer, tending crops and complaining about the weather like any colonist. But Paul had spent 12 years in Earth's Special Forces before volunteering for colony duty. His farming collective of 30 men and women were all veterans who had traded their military uniforms for overalls and work boots. "Doc, we've got incoming," Paul announced, pointing to the sky where bright streaks of light marked the entry of Coalition dropships. "Looks like the Vextar are sending ground troops to investigate what happened to their spy ship." Ben nodded, calmly. "Right on schedule. Maria, activate the welcome mat." Maria pressed a series of buttons on her tablet. Across the colony, plants that had looked like normal crops began changing. Corn stalks swayed without any wind, their kernels swelling and turning bright orange. Tomato vines writhed like snakes, their fruit pulsing with bioluminescent patterns. Wheat fields rustled with movement as something large moved beneath the surface. The first Coalition dropship landed in what appeared to be an empty pasture 2 miles from the main colony. 30 Vextar soldiers emerged, their insect-like bodies covered in environmental suits that should have protected them from any biological threat. They carried energy weapons and sensors designed to detect human technology. Squad leader Buzzerclaw Hextar scanned the area through his helmet display. "No human activity detected. Begin sweep pattern toward the colony center." The soldiers moved forward in standard formation, their boots crushing what looked like harmless grass beneath their feet. They had taken perhaps 50 steps when the Yabdi plants around them began to react. The grass they had stepped on released a fine powder that clung to their environmental suits despite the air filtration systems. "Sir, I'm reading unusual atmospheric conditions," one soldier reported. "High concentrations of unknown organic compounds." Hextar was about to respond when his suit's life support system began malfunctioning. Warning lights flashed across his helmet display as his air purification filters clogged with spores too small for the Coalition's sensors to detect. Around him, his entire squad was experiencing the same problem. "Fall back to the dropship," he ordered. But when they turned around, the vessel was gone. Where it had landed, A massive flowering tree now grew, its roots having consumed the metal hull for nutrients. Vines hung from its branches like party decorations, and bright blue flowers bloomed where the ship's cockpit had been. From his concealed position in the grain silo, Sergeant Paul Davis watched the Vextar soldiers stumble through the fields, like drunk insects. Their environmental suits were failing, but the spores weren't trying to kill them quickly. Instead, they were designed to cause confusion and disorientation while the real defenses activated. Paul spoke into his radio. "All units, the guests have arrived. Time to show them our hospitality." Across the colony, 30 disguised soldiers emerged from barns, equipment sheds, and farmhouses. They carried weapons that looked like farming tools but had been modified for combat. Jenny Walsh, who had spent the morning teaching children about seeds, now held a device that resembled a seed spreader, but fired projectiles containing concentrated spores. The Vextar soldiers tried to form a defensive perimeter, but the ground beneath them was no longer solid. Plants had been growing beneath the soil for months, creating a network of roots and tunnels that made the earth unstable. As the aliens tried to find secure footing, the soil gave way, dropping them into pits lined with thorns that injected paralytic toxins. 3 star systems away, the Coalition fleet received fragments of distress signals from their ground teams before all communication ceased. Admiral Hive Lord Sekrim studied the incomplete reports with growing alarm. "Ground teams report hostile plant life," his communications officer announced. "They're requesting immediate extraction." "Impossible," Sekrim replied. "Plants cannot be hostile. Send more troops to investigate." But as dropships launched toward human colonies across the sector, similar scenes played out on every world. The peaceful farmers revealed themselves to be soldiers. The harmless crops transformed into biological weapons. The simple agricultural tools became instruments of war. On Mars, Dr. Susan Clark activated the planetary defense network she had spent 3 years installing. What had appeared to be geological research stations were actually biological laboratories, connected by underground fungal networks that spanned the entire planet. With a single command, she released spores into the Martian atmosphere that would make the planet uninhabitable for any Coalition species while remaining harmless to humans. Commander Tony Garcia launched his ship from what the Coalition had cataloged as a food processing station. The UES Reaper looked like a cargo hauler loaded with grain containers, but those containers opened to reveal missile tubes loaded with biological warheads. His target was the Coalition supply depot in the Kepler system, where enemy ships refueled and resupplied. As reports of human victories poured in from across the galaxy, Director Lisa Stone stood in her command center deep beneath Colorado, watching her species reveal its true nature to the universe. For 50 years, humanity had prepared for this moment by learning to weaponize life itself. The Coalition had expected humanity to fight with metal and energy, like every other species in the galaxy. Instead, they faced an enemy that had turned every garden into an arsenal and every farmer into a warrior. The war had begun, and the galaxy was about to learn why they should have feared humanity's love of growing things.